As of March 23, 2022, we will no longer receive ad revenue for any video on this channel, even though YouTube still sells advertising on it. The reason, as we've been told, is because we are a channel that presents historical content as opposed to original content. We refuse to be blacked out. We need your support. Please buy Reelblack merchandise from the Reelblack store. Make a donation through PayPal or Cash App, or by joining our Patreon so that we can have the resources necessary to keep the channel growing. Please join our mailing list by sending an email to realblackinc@live.com and follow us on social media at Reelblack so that you can stay informed of future projects created outside of this platform. Reelblack 2 is our backup YouTube channel that carries new original content plus classics from the Reelblack Vault that will be monetized. We ask that you also subscribe there. Thank you. Hey everybody, this is Mike and I'm with
Charles Woods.
And this is a very, very special edition of the Reelblack Podcast. With us today, we have Elie Mystal, who is the author of "Allow Me to Retort." Let me read from the liner notes, if you don't mind, Charles. MSNBC legal commentator Elie Mystal thinks that Republicans are wrong about the law almost all the time. Now, instead of talking about this on cable news, Mystal explains why in his first book. "Allow Me to Retort" is an easily digestible argument about what rights we have, what rights Republicans are trying to take away, and how to stop them. Mystal explains how to protect the rights of women and people of color instead of cowering to the absolutism of gun owners and bigots. He explains the legal way to stop everything from police brutality to political gerrymandering just by changing a few judges and justices. He strips out all the fancy jargon conservatives like to hide behind and lays bare the truth of their project to keep America forever tethered to its slave-holding past. Elie Mystal is the Nation's Justice Correspondent, an Alfred Nobler Fellow, and at the Type Media Center, and the legal editor of the More Perfect podcast on the Supreme Court for Radiolab. He is a graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, the former executive editor of Above the Law, a former associate at Debevoise and Plimpton, and a frequent guest on MSNBC and SiriusXM. He lives in New York. Welcome to the Reelblack Podcast, Mr. Mystal.
Mike, Mr. Woods, thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the first thing before we jump into the book, as we speak, this week is the Supreme Court nominations for Ketanji Brown Jackson. Do you have any hot takes for us?
Yeah, hot takes. She's eminently qualified. She was always the front runner. I've been joking that it was great that Biden said that he was going to nominate the first Black woman. Literally anybody else who was running for the Democratic primary could have said the same thing. Coffin Man, Mayor Stop and Frisk, they all could have said the same thing because Ketanji Brown Jackson was that good. She was always the front runner for this job, and it looks like she's going to get it. I think with Joe Manchin coming on board and now Susan Collins coming on board, that should get you to 50. So I think she's going to get this job, and it's well earned.
Elie, welcome.
Sup?
I told Mike about you. I said, man, we have the opportunity because Elie just wrote a book. I've seen you, I think, first on Elie Mystal's show. And I said, when this cat comes on, tell us what you really think. This brother does not hold back.
Ari's great. He's really given me a platform. And I always like to say that, like, this is back in the day when you could go in studio, people always kind of make fun of Ari's rap references, but I'm going to tell you, that's what's on his phone. All right. Like when his iPod or whatever is playing, he's got NOS on his phone. So he comes by those references. Honestly, man.
Well, you've got a lot of movie references in this book. I listened to the audio version. Now, is it true that you wanted Samuel L. Jackson to do the book before you?
I did because Allow Me to Retort. It's his line from Pulp Fiction, right? Oh, you were finished. Oh, well, allow me to retort, right? And then he kind of goes off, and I thought that would be cool. His people said no, which I think is understandable. I didn't actually get to talk to the man himself, obviously. But once that pipe dream went away, I decided to read it myself. I think it was useful. Look, I try, and if you've read the book, you know that I try to put it in plain English. I try to take the jargon out. I try to make it so that everybody can understand it, not dumb it down, because I don't think people are dumb. I don't think dumbing it down helps anybody. So trying to keep the intellectualism up, but explain it in terms that most people can understand. I think reading it, myself, since I know the terms that I'm dealing with, you can kind of put the right emphasis here and there on certain terms and certain words. So I think that probably helped. If you listen to the audiobook, it probably helps you even understand what I'm talking about a little bit better.
No, it's a fantastic audiobook and a fantastic book. We met shout out to the Free Library of Philadelphia, which is where we met. But can we jump into it, or we got a question?
I just want to get Ellie's take on how these suckers went after Ketanji Jackson, and it had nothing to do with her knowledge of the law. It was all dog whistles. You talked about Susan Collins, who announced that she's going to vote for Miss Jackson, but I think we may get Ben Sass's vote. What do you think?
Sass said he was not, because Sass, he came out as a no. Sass likes to pretend to be a reasonable Republican, but he ain't. He is just as rabidly conservative and hypocritical as a Lindsey Graham or a Ted Cruz. He just doesn't yell and whine as much as the rest of them. But Sass is always on my down list because he's fake. He's a fake individual. Look, for the party that confirmed a judge over attempted rape allegations, for a party that wasn't even willing to investigate those attempted rape allegations, for a party that wouldn't put his friends who could have testified to it under oath, who let the FBI director, his buddy from law school, conduct what investigation there was, for that party to come around on the other side and say they have some problems because of what a judge did. No, not what she did personally. Everybody agrees that Ketanji Brown Jackson has lived an exemplary life free of even a whiff of scandal and sexual harassment. But to then criticize her for her sentencing as a judge in 5 out of the 570 cases that she's presided over. The hypocrisy just drips from the ceiling with these people. That they had to go to calling her an advocate for pedophilia shows just how far afield they are, shows just how deep they had to dig to get anything on this woman who has prepared basically her life for this job. The only thing that I want people to understand is that the reason why they did that is to excite their violent and dangerous QAnon base. Mm-hmm. They know that when they make these attacks, their most virulent and violent supporters get excited, right? They know that they are putting Ketanji Brown Jackson and her family at risk when they do this. I know they know that because one of the cases that they didn't talk about that Ketanji Brown Jackson presided over, she sentenced the guy who was involved in Pizzagate. So remember, there was this violent guy in D.C. He tried to shoot people. He thought there was a pedophile ring happening in the basement of a pizza parlor. There was no basement, much less a pedophile ring there. So he got sentenced to 4 years by Ketanji Brown Jackson. So there's a little bit of, from where I sit, there's a little bit of payback here as well. Not only are they doing it to rile up the Q base, they know that the Q base already knows this woman, already doesn't like this woman because she sentenced one of their heroes to 4 years in prison. So it was very, I think, insidious. I think it was very dangerous. What they did, what they tried to do. She's gonna come through. She's going to come through it. But you shouldn't ever let the Republicans off the hook, whether they be the dripping hypocrisy of Lindsey Graham or the silent assassin of Ben Sass. You should never let these people off the hook for the dirt that they try to do.
And Lindsey Graham is not racist because he wanted Charles instead of Jackson.
Right? I mean, look, there's always some other black woman in the room that they totally would have supported, just not the one in front of them. You know, one of the funny things about the Republicans there is that Lindsey Graham kept pointing out about how, they tried to nominate Janice Rogers Brown, and they wanted her to be a Supreme Court justice. But you'll note that they never nominated her for the Supreme Court. Right? She was put on the DC circuit in 2003. That Lindsey Graham was going all the way back to a confirmation battle in 2003 whenever he brought her name up. Do you want me to tell you how many justices the Republicans appointed after 2003? I will, because I know. John Roberts, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. What do those 5 people have in common? They're all white. They're all white. So, like, when Lindsey Graham says, they were just about to appoint a black person, man, they have 5 chances to appoint anybody of color. You know? They could have appointed somebody who with a good tan, and they didn't do it.
Well, let's jump into the book. The first question we have is a little loaded, but to set the table, is America systemically racist, Elie?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course. It's written our founding documents are the racism and the apartheid rule is written into our document. The Constitution is designed to always allow for kind of minority white rule because it gives equal suffrage in the Senate to states, not people, right? And it turns out that people of color, even as we become a browning country, even as we head towards a majority minority country, people of color are not evenly spread out around this country. Most black people still live in the states where our ancestors were enslaved, right? The highest population the highest black population by population in the state is Mississippi, and then it's Louisiana, and then it's Georgia, right? That's where most black people still live. Most Latinos still live in Texas, California, the states. Most Asian Americans live in New York, California. We're on the coasts. We're in the South. There ain't a whole lot of people of color in Idaho. There ain't a whole lot of people of color in Wyoming, but those states get just as much Senate representation as the big states. I've pointed out a couple of times. If North Dakota and South Dakota combined get 4 senators, how many senators should Queens get, which has twice the Queens, New York, which has twice the population of the Dakotas combined? And the answer is Queens gets 0 senators. It gets a say in one of the 2 senators that New York gets to represent, right? So, like, the imbalance is, again, written into the very document.
Right. So you say the core premise of the book is that the Constitution is trash.
Yeah, I'm surprised that's been a bit of a controversial statement. I think it's pretty obvious, right? The Constitution was written by slavers, white male slavers, white male colonists, and white male abolitionists who nonetheless were willing to make deals with slavers and colonists. Like, I wouldn't have made a deal with them, but these alleged abolitionists were willing to make a deal with them. Nobody of color was allowed to vote was allowed to write the documents or write the amendments or vote on the ratification thereof. No women were allowed a say or allowed to vote or allowed to participate in the discussions around the Constitution. The idea that this slaver's document written 250 years ago represents the best we can do as a society is just ridiculous on its face. Of course it's not very good. Look, any document written by like one kind of person is going to have some obvious gaps, right? Like, you don't even like you wouldn't watch a Netflix show if it's only written by one kind of person, right? You need more, as Kermit the Frog might say, you need more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things to make your show work, right? So the idea that the Constitution is some kind of sacred document is just, it's laughable on its face.
Elie, even from the get-go, you had a number of delegates who refused to sign the Constitution because it protected slavery and the slave trade. Also, some didn't want to sign the document because it didn't include the Bill of Rights.
Right. So that you're talking about the Federalist anti-Federalist debate. So you got to remember that the people who wrote it, the James Madisons and Thomas Jeffersons and Alexander Hamiltons, they didn't think the Constitution needed amendments. They thought that the government was fine just as it is. It was what's called the anti-Federalists who thought the Constitution needed amendments. And some of the key things they wanted to protect were their rights to hold slaves. So in the book, I talk about the true origins of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has nothing to do with personal self-defense. That's some bollocks the Republicans made up yesterday. It has nothing to do with self-defense. It has everything to do with slaves, and controlling the slaves, right? Because it turns out, and this isn't going to come as a galloping shock for most of your listeners, but it turns out holding people in bondage against their will is hard. You need to outnumber them, both in terms of population, and you need to overwhelm them in terms of military force. Now, overall, the white Southerners both outnumbered and outgunned the enslaved population in the American South. This was not true in every country. My family goes back to Haiti. Numbers got reversed, so you see what happens, right? But in America, white people outnumber the black people and they have more guns. But that population advantage didn't hold in every part of the South. Virginia, for instance, was almost 40% enslaved humans, right? And so there were parts of Virginia where black people outnumbered the white people. There were parts of South Carolina where black people outnumbered the white people, right? So occasionally, slaves on those plantations would rise up in revolt. How would those slave revolts be put down? The militia. The well-regulated militia was raised up to come and crush the slave revolt. Very Roman-esque, right, in terms of how they did it. So in the original Constitution, it wasn't clear that the states were going to have the power to raise the militia to defend themselves from the slave revolts, right? So what the anti-federalists won, and this is, George Mason, governor of Virginia, Patrick Henry, delegate in Virginia, they've argued in public that they had a problem because the North, I'm quoting them, detests slavery. And they were afraid that if the federal government was dominated by Northerners and the federal government could raise the militia, then they wouldn't raise the militia to come put down the slave revolts. And that's why they wanted the Second Amendment, so that they could arm and discipline their own state militias so they could go crush the slave revolts. That's why it's there, folks. That's why we have.
But Elie,
that's why we have the Second Amendment.
We didn't have slave revolts. Didn't we have happy darkies?
They always want to. That's been one of the weirdest pushbacks that I've gotten from this book, right? Like that people are always trying to, they had slavery everywhere. Well, not like they had it here in America. There's a reason why we call it chattel slavery. The idea that you could inherit slavery as a condition. See, in the old world, in Europe, in ancient times, in Egypt and Rome, slavery was you had to conquer your slaves, right? You had to go out, beat somebody at war, and bring back the slaves to your territory. You couldn't inherit slavery. That was gross. To the Assyrians, to the Romans, that was gross, right? It's an American invention, and by America in this context, I mean the Americas, the New World. It's a New World invention to have slavery be something that is passed down generation after generation with no opportunity for getting out of that other than the grace of your owner. That is something relatively distinct to the New World. That's why we call it chattel slavery. You could never get out. So it's completely different than the kinds of slavery that was practiced in the Old World and in the Ancient World.
This is going to segue into the question we have for you about reparations, because slavery was all about cheap labor. They first attempted to enslave the Native the Indians. That didn't work out. We had the indentured servants. You had blacks as well as whites as indentured. But cheap labor and the wealth that was accrued from that slave labor. What about reparations?
Obviously, I'm for it. My only issue is that a lot of times, I think the conversation sometimes gets warped into conversations of like, oh, well, what are we having the reparations for, right? So like, there are some people who think that the reparations, you have to trace back your roots to here, going at least back to 1865, right, end of the Civil War. That's one way of doing it, I suppose. But I mean, white people were bombing the wealth out of Tulsa in the 20th century, right? Like white people were stealing black labor and underpaying black people and stealing black wealth well into the 20th century, right? So, I mean, I'm for reparations, but like, honestly, man, there's a part of me that's like, I don't start the clock until like 1984. All right, like Jesse Jackson runs for president in 1984. That's about when I feel, put like this: if I had a time machine, right? I don't want to go back in America earlier than 1984. About once Jesse Jackson is kind of established and he's running for president, and the Democrats realize that like black people vote too, and maybe we should care about, like, then things start to then things start to improve. But much earlier than that, there's just a lot of pilfering of black wealth, talent, and labor in this country. So my issue with the reparations is always like, well, when do you? It's not how far back should you go. It's like how recently are you allowed to really stop, right? Because there's some atrocities happen in America at all points, and certainly well into the 20th century.
Yeah, let's get into that, because you have a chapter called "The Taking of Black Land." Mm-hmm. And how it relates to the Constitution. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. So weirdly, the most conservative part of my book is what you're talking about, right? Because I'm dealing with the Fifth Amendment's grants of eminent domain. That means that the government can't come in and say, we want your land, and they can just take it from you and build what the government says that it wants. Now, philosophically, eminent domain makes perfect sense, right? You have to have it. Like if you're the government and you're at war and you need my land to build a wall, right, to stop the foreign nation from taking over the country, like my land is forfeit. That's just how it has to be, right? So I get it. I get that the government has to have a way to take land and repurpose it for public purposes, right? And war being the obvious example, but there are lots of other ones. Like I think they should be able to take land to keep historical sites going. They should probably be able to take land to build a hospital. They should probably be able to take land and build solar panels. But should they be able to take land and build a sports stadium? Should they be able to take land and build a mall? Should they be able to take land and build a highway? You see, like the government will always have a reason for taking your stuff. And it always happens that the land that they take, it's never the rich, connected white folks who get their land taken, right? Like if we need to build, think about right now, we got climate change. We probably need to build some more levees, some sandbars, right? When they go to Florida and take some land to build the new levees, it ain't going to be Mar-a-Lago, right? It ain't going to be the rich, connected white Republican land. It's always the poor black land. It's always the land of the people who are, if not black, then they're brown. They're unconnected. They don't have good legal representation. And their land gets taken from them on the cheap, then sold to billionaires who then develop that land, and then they can't even afford to, like, so this is the story of gentrification, right? They take your land, they give you slum prices, they redevelop your neighborhood so it's actually nice, and now you can't afford to live there. So you got to go find some other slum to live in, but now that other slum doesn't have all your people there, doesn't have your community there. So now you start to fall through the cracks, right? Because your old slum, at least you knew the deacon, at least you knew the guy at the 7-Eleven who could like float you, street credit, like true street credit. You're good for it in a couple of days, my friend, right? But now you go to this new slum and you don't have those connections and you fall through the cracks. So like this is what happens. This is how poverty turns into homelessness. This is how homelessness turns into destitution. This is how destitution turns into death. And it happens all the time. And it happens in part because of this idea we have about the government's use of eminent domain and when it's okay for the government to take people's land. So I'm not saying that the government can't take land. I'm saying it needs to have a real good reason, and like football stadium is not one of them, and it needs to pay people not the slum prices. It needs to pay people what their land would be worth if people cared about that land.
Right. Yeah. You talk about the value of Central Park.
Yep. So I do this whole chapter on Seneca Village. Seneca Village was a free, independent, land-owning village of Black people in the middle of Manhattan. About 220 Black families owned their land. They could vote. This is back in the 19th century, before the 15th Amendment, before the Civil War, when literally 10% of New York's Black voting population lived in Seneca Village. And they took it from them. In 1857, they took it from them to build Central Park. And now Central Park, the real estate right next to Central Park, is some of the most valuable real estate on earth. And these people got, $3,000 for their acres of land in the middle of Central Park. So I say, go find them. Go find the people of Seneca Village and start by giving reparations to them. Because their land was worth billions, and they should get a little cut of that. Central Park, which, by the way, I didn't even put this in the book, but Central Park, which, of course, it was very hard for Black people to get to when it was first built. This park that was supposed to be for everybody, they designed it so it was actually difficult for poor people and Black people to even get to the park, much less enjoy a nice, afternoon stroll there. It's just...
Right. Well, one of the things that we talk about a lot on the channel is how integration led to our disintegration. But it seems like it's even more insidious when you examine the law.
Yeah, I mean, did integration lead to disintegration? I mean, I think it's always a provocative statement. I think that's true in some cases, right? When you look at the Negro Leagues, right? The Negro Leagues were doing fine. They were independent, and it was great baseball, right? Did integration kill the Negro Leagues? Yeah, absolutely. Kill the Negro Leagues helped Major League Baseball. And, did the Negro Leaguers ever get the full value of their contribution? Those first Black Major League Baseball players, did they ever get the full value of their contribution? Probably not. On the other hand, without Jackie Robinson, so much progress doesn't happen. People think that it's sports and so that it's not as important. No, without people like Jackie Robinson, without people like Sidney Poitier, you don't get people like Barack Obama. You just can't make that connection without these people. So there are costs, but there are definitely benefits as well. I come back to this idea of making sure people get the full value, right, of what they've done, right? So I think it's, for instance, right now, critically important that we fund HBCUs, right? I didn't go to one, but I know a lot of people did, and I who do, and I know a lot of people who have been able to. What's wrong with looking? It's a slightly nuanced point, but they've been able to develop their minds and their confidence without the oppressive structures of white supremacy just leaning on them. You know what I mean? Just leaning on them the whole time when they're kids. I'm lucky. I went to Harvard, obviously, but I was a kind of a confident kid. I had some skills, some ability to kind of defend myself, I think, against some of the white supremacy that I kind of experienced in my life. But not every kid has that. Not every kid has those foundations. And I think making sure that there are still places in this world where you can learn free of the corrupting influence of white supremacy is critically important. So while I think overall it is good that colleges and universities are integrated, I'm very happy I was able to go to Harvard. I'm very happy for W.E.B. Du Bois, who blazed that trail for me and people like me. But at the same token, we need to take some of the gains from integration and make sure that we're putting it back in to things like HBCUs and things in our community to make sure that people have a path up that doesn't require interacting is not the right word, that doesn't require being subservient to the white man.
Hey, are you enjoying this conversation? So am I. Now remember, the only way to watch the whole interview, the 1-hour version of this interview, is to be a member of Patreon, our Patreon page. Donate as little as $3 a month and have access to exclusive bonus features like the full interview that me and Charles had with Elie Mystal.